Welcome to AINdebrief, where we take a deeper look at the most important or interesting aviation story of the past week with the AIN editor who covered it. I'm AIN News Editor Chad Trotvetter. This podcast is sponsored by Business Aviation Sustainability Solutions Company 4Air. The National Business Aviation Association's annual convention was held in person earlier this month for the first time in 2 years. Last year, NBAA canceled its traditional convention due to the pandemic, but held a scaled-down virtual show. This year's event took place in the new West Hall of the Las Vegas Convention Center and included a COVID vaccination requirement to attend. In this podcast episode, AIN Editor-in-Chief Matt Thurber and Senior Editor Carrie Lynch discuss how the show went and what exhibitors thought about the lighter attendance. Okay, so NBAA-BACE 2021 was last week. So let's talk about the show. So Carrie, you talked to NBA quite a bit beforehand. So what did they think it was going to be like at the show in Las Vegas last week?
Well, NBA Chad was really excited leading up to the show. They were excited because, first of all, it gave a forum for people to get back together, and at a very important time in the industry when they'd gone through so much with having to deal with the restrictions and the market falling down in COVID, and now it's coming back up. And, you know, I had talked to Ed Bolin, and he was discussing how important it is that people gather to share ideas and best practices and strategize on how to move forward. And with COVID, there were a bunch more issues that are starting to emerge, such as, workforce shortages and, how to deal with vaccines and, a range of issues. And he was very anxious to get people together to discuss this. And they had gathered some really good speakers on those fronts and on more general fronts. The other thing that he was really excited about is that this show was going to take place at a very important time in the industry. I mean, things are rapidly changing. Not only do we have a white hot market and everything is selling quickly, but you have things like sustainability. You have the new emerging technologies from eVTOLs to drones to just more efficient autonomous technologies. And they had a lot of people lined up to talk on all of those issues. As far as the event itself, they were encouraged because coming into it, they had going into the new hall, which had it was a 1 million square foot hall. They were able to get all the exhibitors into one floor instead of breaking it down like they had before in Las Vegas. And they had nearly sold out all the space. Now, let's qualify that. That's still about 75% of what they normally sell in a regular convention year. But what they had, they were able to sell. And they were encouraged that attendance was running around 18,000 to 20,000 leading into the show. Probably one of the biggest live in-person events since COVID began.
Right. So actually, Matt, you were on the floor Tuesday morning while Carrie and I were working in our press room. So you got to see the Honda unveiling, and you were kind of on the floor in general that morning. So what was it like at the opening of the show? And also, what was the Honda event like?
Chad, it was pretty active on Tuesday morning. People were bunched up as usual, waiting to get in as soon as the doors opened, and the floor was after the Honda unveiling, I walked back through the floor and there were plenty of people. It just seemed like a typical NBAA show, even though the West Hall at the convention center isn't as large as the combined North and South halls. But nevertheless, it seemed like a lively, active show. That was my impression.
So let's talk about the HondaJet. That was the big news at the show. So tell us a little bit about what Mr. Fugino said, the president and CEO of Honda Aircraft, about the aircraft, and whether this is a launch or if this is just a unveiling of sorts.
Absolutely, Chad. That was the most exciting event of the show. Honda Aircraft has kept this pretty well under wraps, although we kind of suspected they were up to something because they built that new wing factory that they opened last year, and pretty sure it's too big just to manufacture wings, although it's also good signal that Honda Aircraft is becoming way more vertically integrated. But in any case, at the show on Tuesday morning, pretty much first thing, Honda Aircraft President and CEO Mikimasu Fujino announced the new HondaJet 2600 concept and lifted the curtain on a mock-up of the cabin, which also had short wings with engines mounted in the now typical Honda Aircraft over-the-wing engine mount configuration and a T-tail. So it's pretty much a similar configuration to the original HondaJet, but it really ups the performance ante quite a bit.
And it's a bigger cabin as well, right?
Exactly. This is still a light jet, but it's in the max takeoff weight range of about 17,500 pounds. So it's going to compete with the Citation CJ4, the Phenom 300E, and the Pilatus PC24. But because the engines are mounted on the wings instead of on the aft fuselage, it removes a lot of plumbing and systems stuff from the back of the fuselage and lets you make the cabin larger. So it can seat up to 11 occupants. That's including the single pilot. And with 4 passengers can fly 2,625 nautical miles. Now that kind of gives you a hint at where the name comes from, the HondaJet 2600, but also it kind of coincides too with 2006, which is when the announcement was made to commercialize the original HondaJet. So the HondaJet 2600, it's being called a concept because this is not a program launch. This is the launch of the market demand measurement period, and Honda Aircraft's going to see if there is enough demand for this aircraft and its transcontinental performance and make a decision, hopefully fairly soon, about going to market with it.
So you were at the static as well. So what did the static look like? I didn't actually get there. I was there on Saturday when I got in. I flew aboard a Phenom 300E that was on static display, and we came in on SAF. So that was a nice little flight. But I only saw the setup. So what was the static like, and what was the activity like out there too, Matt?
There was a good amount of activity. There was admittedly more space than normal because there just weren't as many aircraft as a typical NBAA static display. So it was at Henderson Executive Airport, and that's fairly easy to get to. But there was still a good amount of people there, and the great thing about it was, except for the awfully windy and cold Monday when they pretty much had to shut down the static display in the afternoon, the weather during the show was just right for a static display in the low 70s, sunny, but definitely not as hot as it can be sometimes in Nevada. So it worked out pretty well, all in all.
Yeah, and actually for the first time at the show, they had a helicopter shuttle from the convention center to the airport for static display as a demonstration for urban air mobility.
That's right. And this was put on by Blade Urban Air Mobility, which is developing the infrastructure for future electric, hybrid electric, etc., eVTOL and advanced air mobility type travel. They figure if they pave the way with helicopters now, they'll be in a better position to get services launched on these new vehicles when they start to get certified and operational. So my colleague Jerry Siebenmark got to fly on the Blade flight from the West Hall at the convention center. And I drove, and we kind of did a little race to see who would get there first. And of course, the helicopter took about half the time that I took driving. So,
yeah, and that includes the startup and shutdown times for the helicopter too. So it wasn't actually the whole
exactly.
trip time. It was just there's a lag at the beginning, a lag at the end. And I guess when we get to eVTOLs, that lag will be pretty much gone, right?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to sit there and warm up the oil or wait for the rotor blades to get up to speed. I mean, it happens really fast in an electric motor powered vehicle.
Yeah. So one of the other big things was sustainability. So Carrie, you actually had done a story ahead of the show on this. So do you want to outline what the sustainability efforts were there?
Well, one of the things they did was become carbon or have a carbon neutral show with 4Air and offsetting credits. And, they had planes fly in on SAF, and Chad, you were on one of them. They had SAF available at both Henderson and McCarran. And some of the fuel suppliers joined into the efforts. And they did they try to make everything as sustainable throughout the convention as possible.
Yeah, and some of the companies actually did sustainability pledges as well.
Right.
Well, actually, that's a really good segue into our sponsor, 4Air. So let's just roll into that. Now more than ever, taking to the sky means taking responsibility for the climate-altering emissions released into our environment with every departure. That's because the future of our shared planet, along with the freedom of mobility that defines our way of life, depends on today's pursuit of absolute sustainability. There is no one solution, but with 4Air, you can advance every pillar of aviation sustainability. Learn how to make your flying part of the solution with a comprehensive sustainability commitment for individuals and operators alike. Visit 4air.aero today. That's numeral 4 AIR.AERO. All right, welcome back. Let's continue on the subject of sustainability. NBA, Gamma, and IBAC, they gave an update on the industry's progress on emissions and decarbonization goals from 2009, and they also kind of raised the bar a little bit. So, Carrie, you want to talk about that?
Yes. So on Tuesday morning, before the convention actually officially opened, NBA and Gamma held their usual media breakfast, and at that time, they announced that they, along with IBAC, were upping their commitment of sustainability. They had established goals originally in 2009 to increase efficiency by 2% a year between 2010 and 2020 and reduce carbon emissions 50% by 2050 and achieve a carbon neutral growth by 2020. Well, they were meeting all those goals, and they were looking forward, and they believe that the industry can still march forward to a goal of net zero carbon dioxide emissions by 2050. So they signed a commitment to set that as their goal and work towards it. And they are confident they can get there with all the efforts going on, not just from SAF, but also from the electric standpoint and different advancements in aerodynamics and technologies.
Let's also talk about the other big thing at the show. That was the requirement to be vaccinated to even be able to attend. So how did that go?
I thought it went really, really smoothly. Leading up when they made the announcement, when they made the announcement that they were going to require vaccines to enter the convention floor, NBAA had made that their own decision. It was not a decision that they had to do to meet government regulations, but they did make the request in concert with the governor's office in Las Vegas, um, officials as well. And in return, they were able to get around the mask mandate at Las Vegas. And they just felt like that was important for people who were getting together and meeting face to face for the first time, that they have that opportunity to do so. Now, so to get there, they set up a clear app, and it took 2 seconds to snap a picture of a vaccine card, and all you had to do is show it on the way in. I thought there might be really long lines to get in. I didn't see any lines to get in. I always was able to walk right in with it. And I found most people still wore masks, particularly in the hallways, maybe not in rooms here and there, but in the hallways, people still were a little bit cautious. But for a mask mandate, I really do think it was implemented very smoothly. I didn't see any issues. I'm not saying there weren't, but I didn't see any. And, uh, I think it worked for this show.
So let's talk about the show in general, Matt. I know you spoke to some of the exhibitors at the show. What did they think about attendance and the quality of people that they met?
Yes, Chad, I spoke to quite a few exhibitors, and in general, they seemed pretty happy that they were there. Now, we do know that a lot of the exhibitors cut down on the number of staffers they brought, and some of them cut down the size of their exhibits. But it still worked out really well. There were plenty of great exhibits on hand, plenty of people to see what they were exhibiting. And the exhibitors I spoke to said that they were happy with the crowds. They felt they were good quality visitors. And even though the traffic tends to die down on the last day of the show, I was walking around on that day, which was Thursday, October 14th, and I ran into my friend Shervin Rezai at Aircraft Lighting International. And I just commented to him, boy, some of these booths look pretty lonely. And he said, oh, no, that's completely the wrong way to think about it. He told me that no matter what show he goes to and how much traffic there is, he always comes away having met some people that create opportunities for his company. If there aren't a lot of visitors, he talks to a lot of the vendors, and the products he sells, LED replacement lights for new and retrofit applications, have a huge market, and there's always somebody worth talking to, he said. So I thought that was just a demonstration of why it's worth coming to these shows, but also of a guy with a terrific attitude as well. And I think he'll get a lot of business because of it.
Yeah, and it wasn't all it wasn't all kind of empty, because I know we tried to get into the Challenger 3500 mock-up, and they just couldn't accommodate us because they just were overloaded with people who wanted to go in and see the mock-up.
Oh, that's right. At the static display, there were actually some pretty interesting mock-ups of new aircraft, not only the Challenger 3500 from Bombardier, but also the Falcon 6X and 10X mock-ups were there, and those were pretty crowded a lot of the time.
Yeah, and what was the situation like at the aircraft? Were there waiting lines for some of the aircraft to get into?
Yes, there definitely were, but it wasn't like some shows where Las Vegas tends to attract a really high number of attendees, and there's been some past years where the lines were just endless. This show wasn't quite like that.
So I'll just ask both of you to just give your 30-second general impression on how you thought the show went overall. So Matt, let's start with you, and then we'll end with Carrie.
I thought it was a very good NBAA show given the circumstances, the ongoing pandemic, and the first show since NBAA wasn't able to hold a live show last year. And we didn't expect it to be a blowout, gigantic show bigger than 2019, but it was very well put on. It had lots of great content. Everybody who came seemed to be happy about it, and those who really went through the trouble thought it was well worthwhile.
I thought it was a very strong show, and we have to remember the attendance was definitely down, and part of it was we still have the restrictions on international travel. So there are people who had planned on coming that just couldn't get there. I mean, Piaggio had planned on exhibiting and wasn't able, and then others for health and safety reasons, like Gulfstream, had decided not to go to any shows this year. So with that as a backdrop, I do think that it was a pretty heavily attended show for those who were able to go and get there, and for some of the concerns surrounding it. I also think that it was, they had some pretty key people. A lot of people from FAA showed up. The administrator showed up. They had Rob Riggle show up, and some interesting people from all corners of the industry participate. I also thought it was a newsier show. Some of the news was announced beforehand, like the Honeywell and the Bombardier 3500, which we had referred to, but some happened right there at the show. And I think there was just a lot of pent up, product unveilings and releases that were coming down. So, walking away from our standpoint, we had plenty to write about, plenty of people to see. And I think people who were there also had plenty of business to do.
Well, actually, if anybody wants to read the news from the show, they can just go to our website, www.ainonline.com, and they can click on the NBA page, and also has a little box on the right that has a link to our PDF versions of the print issue that we did at the show. So I think that's a pretty good ending. I think everybody was happy, and just happy to be back together, actually. So thanks for your thoughts, guys.
Thank you, Chad.
Thank you, Chad. Yeah, I agree. And everybody was happy to be together. No question about that.
Thanks for listening to AINdebrief. Another podcast episode will air next Friday. In the meantime, go to www.ainonline.com for the latest aviation news from AIN.